Kia ora crafters and welcome to Crafting with Heidi. Tonight we are going to make 2 Father's Day cards. Green and white is our theme for tonight. So grab your scissors and your paper and things and we're going to get started. Okay, so for this card we're going to do this one first, and what we've got here is a plain white card base, and then we've got a black layer and a dark green layer, and I've used some scraps of white and black there and some twine. So I've got this pad of, it's called Craft Core cardstock. So this colour on the back is what is inside the cardstock, as you can see here. So I've sandpapered the raised edges after I've embossed it. So I don't have another one of that really dark green, so I might use that. Actually quite like that sort of teal colour, so let's use that. All right, and so I'm going to use my nested dies. The larger one will be for the black layer and the smaller one for the green layer. So I need my die cutting machine. So the larger of the two goes with the black. Just need the one sheet. And now it doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm going to get some low tack tape here to hold down that die so it doesn't wiggle around in the machine. Just sort of trim it a little bit so there's not a whole lot hanging off the edge. And we'll just run it through there. Because it's a basic simple shape, it'll cut really easily. That's better. Here we go. So we've got that base layer. And now we need the green layer. So we'll do the same thing again. If you haven't used a die cutting machine before, don't panic, it's fine. Okay, and then we've got our green layer. So we'll put our little bits and bobs off to the side that we don't need at the moment. So you'll see this green layer here has some texture to it. And with this one, I'm going to put it through there. So you want to line it up so it's actually even, parallel. Right, and we will have a different sandwich because these are a 3D embossing folder. So it's a bit thicker than a standard embossing folder. All right, so you can see that our little cardstock piece there has lots of gorgeous texture to it. And I've just got myself a little bit of sandpaper. It's a relatively fine grain. But if you've just got a standard one, then just go a bit easier on it and just rough up the top of it. Because as I said, this cardstock is what's known as Craft Core. So you'll see there that Craft Core, obviously, is coming through. Now I didn't go too crazy, and I'm not going to. I just want it in a few spots, not over the entire thing. Just, you know, a bit of a grungy sort of a look here and there. And if you got all excited, you could also ink over the top of that, and the bits that are raised with the texture and that have got the top taken off it will take up that ink colour. That might be quite a cool look too. Right, I think that's probably enough. We'll put our sandpaper aside. Now that's going to sit on there quite nicely. And we don't stick it down to our card base yet because, as you can see, got the twine around the back. What we'll do is we'll glue this one down just to itself, the black base layer to the textured layer. Just use a bit of liquid glue. Right, so just line that up. Find the nicest looking edges. That down there, and we'll put something weighty on it just to hold it down while the glue sets a little bit. Now for this next layer, so because I've got the twine around there, it's not going to stick to the card base. So I've used some of this double-sided foam tape just to give it a bit of lift to get that twine under there. I actually couldn't find any more of that at home, so I've just got this much thinner stuff, but it's still going to look cool. Now I've gone around 3 times. Feel free to choose how many, but I've tend to go with odd numbers, 3, 5, whatever. It just tends to look more visually appealing, I guess. Right, and then we're going to use a bit more of this, just this tape, just to tack it down, because once it's there, it'll stay. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Use those scissors to cut that off. Right, so secure it on the back, obviously, and then it just shows on the front. And then what we're going to do is put some of this foam tape. You don't have to cover the entire back. In fact, just around the edges, except for this bit, will probably work best. Right, and then I fit that in there, just. Okay, so there we have that. Put it onto our card base and then we'll do our sentiment. Looking good. Okay, now I've got this little stamp here, and if you've seen some of these videos before, I think last Father's Day or possibly the one before, I might have used that same stamp because it's not something I have a whole lot of, to be honest, but I really like it. It's a nice plain font, so it works really well with all sorts of designs. Now, as I said, I've just got a scrap piece of white cardstock here. And I'm going to stamp this one in black. And just give it a second for the ink to soak in. So line it up. I mean, I'm going with the bottom right corner, but do whatever works for you. And then I'm just going to rearrange these because they look a bit odd, sitting all on top of one another. Give them away. Cool. Same, but different. Here we go. So we'll pop those out and we'll work on our next one. So this here is a plain white card base. But that's not a green layer of paper, that's just inking around the edges, and I'll show you what I do with that in a minute. And we've got another panel cut to size and embossed with an embossing folder. That one's called Geo Diamonds, I believe. And I've also embossed onto a scrap of the green cardstock that we used for this card and cut it out just as a visual change, I guess. So that should be big enough for that one. We'll just check that out. Yes, that's absolutely fine. So I'll get my embossing folder that I'm going to use. Again, that's going to be slightly too big. So we'll cut that down to size again with our nesting dies. I'm going to run it through twice and do them separately, just to make sure. There we go, look at that, just gorgeous. Now we're going to do our scrap. Do it exactly the same, but make sure that when you're lining it up, you actually make sure you've got a full hexagon covered up with your paper, otherwise you won't have anything there to cut out. Beautiful. Yep, that's worked exactly how I need it to. So what we're going to do is we're going to ink our card base, and then set that aside to dry and do our other bits and pieces. So we'll just leave the embossed pieces there for a moment. Now what I've got here is a dark green ink, because I'm going with the green theme, and I've got my little ink daubers. So they're just little sponge things. You can get them all sorts of different places. Craft stores in New Zealand do stock them, but if you want to save a couple of dollars, then there are other options you can order online. But I'm going to pick out, yes, my dark green one. And we're just going to ink that up. Oops. And just go around the edges with that. So you see I've gone around all the edges with that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that aside to dry, and we'll come back to that bit. So we're going to cut out one of our shapes here and just go around the edges. Easy peasy. Here we go. Set that on there. Here we go. And you've probably noticed I'm using two different pairs of scissors. These ones are paper only, super sharp and give a really good cut. These I use for precision cutting, smaller things, sticky things, because, well, it's not technically a non-stick blade. It does do really well at coping with anything with adhesive, and super easy to clean and very stay sharp and small and easy to handle, with a spring in the handle to make them super easy to use for things like small precision cuts. Right, that one is going to be dimensional foam again. And then take the backing paper off that, and then line that up. So I've done that one centrally at the base, but you do what works for you. Now we bring in our card base again, should be dry enough hopefully. And we're going to just make sure that's going to look very cool indeed. Yay. All right, so I'm going to stick that down. You could also use foam tape for that as well. That would look quite cool with a little shadow there from that dimension. And we line that up again, trying to eyeball it so it's even around the edges. Then press that down. And give it a minute with something heavy on it for that glue to set a bit. There we go. How about that then? And there we have it. Some handmade Father's Day cards. So I hope you enjoyed our session tonight and that you have a lot of fun with your crafting and you have a really cool Father's Day.